I'll now introduce our moderator for today, Joshua Baca, Vice President of Plastics at the American Chemistry Council. Joshua?
Thank you, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. As Jennifer said, I'm Joshua Baca, and I am the Vice President of the Plastics Division at the American Chemistry Council. On behalf of our members and our partners, thank you so much for being here with us today. Our members are the leading producers of modern plastic material used to make countless consumer and durable goods and innovations that improve the quality of our lives, our environment, and the economy. And just like you, we care about the environment and have a forward-looking vision to protect it for generations to come. We're working with policymakers, brand owners, retailers, and a host of stakeholders to create a more circular and sustainable plastics industry. Our vision is guided by our circularity roadmap and outlines a bold plan that we are executing through public policy, through partnerships and collaboration, through innovation, and through industry investments. We are implementing this roadmap with key partners across the value chain to address both plastic waste in the environment and climate change. This includes several key components. First off, we are for a shared responsibility model that levies fees on packaging to ensure that those resources get redirected towards recycling infrastructure and consumer education. We are for the acceleration of advanced recycling technologies, which is the most effective tool at our disposal to capture more plastic waste and revolutionize how we use and reuse our plastic materials. We are for more recycled and circular content based on science and engineering to ensure that more used plastic is remade into new products. And we're for a national recycling standard that sets standardization across the US and improves access for consumers all across the country. This is a comprehensive, bipartisan, innovative strategy focused on sustainable change, fighting climate change, and reducing plastic waste. Later this week, a misguided and harmful piece of legislation known as the Break Free from Plastics Pollution Act will be introduced. Supporters of this legislation will claim their intent is to end plastic waste. And as I just told you, we share that vision. Plastic in the environment is never acceptable. But after a careful analysis of the legislation, we have concluded it won't end plastic waste, but rather end the American plastics industry by restricting the production of modern and innovative plastic materials. Domestic supply chain would be disrupted and force businesses to search for alternatives. Some they may not be available. Burdensome regulation would be imposed on already struggling industries, and advanced recycling technologies will be prevented from coming to market and eliminate the best tool we have to recover more plastic waste. The legislation picks winners and losers, incentivizes materials that produce significantly more greenhouse gas emissions, and it limits products essential to combating climate change. Let me give you a few examples. Electric car vehicle batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines. If passed into law, the legislation will also risk a shortage of critical items, ranging from masks to gowns, face shields and syringes, and specialized packaging for vaccines, undermining the global economic and health response to COVID-19. But today's panel of speakers are going to tell you a very important story, a story about how plastics contribute so much to sustainable living. Let me be the first to acknowledge we have more work to do to ensure plastic is kept out of the environment. But we have a plan, and we know it is a solvable problem and one that we are committed to. With that, I want to introduce our first speaker, Jim Fitterling. Jim is the chairman and CEO of Dow and the chairman of the board of directors at the American Chemistry Council. Jim is a fantastic advocate for both sustainable and circular solutions, and his vision and his leadership has continued to guide us on this. I'd like to introduce Jim and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joshua, for that introduction, and thanks for inviting Dow to be part of this important discussion. And it is important as we talk about plastics, plastic waste, and the larger question of how moving the world forward towards a more circular economy is the right goal. I know we don't have a lot of time, so what I'd like to do is just share what I consider to be a few grounding principles when it comes to plastic waste and this legislation. First, one I believe that we all agree on: there's too much plastic waste ending up in the environment, and that is simply unacceptable. Second, we must do more to stop the waste while also closing the loop by creating a more circular economy. So at Dow, for instance, we have intended to stop the plastic waste by enabling 1 million metric tons of plastic to be collected, reused, or recycled through our direct actions and partnerships by 2030. And we aim to close the loop by enabling 100% of Dow products sold into packaging applications to be reusable or recyclable by 2035. And I know others here have also set aggressive targets to stop the waste and drive the plastics industry toward a more circular economy. Third, if our collective intent is to positively impact climate change and reduce carbon emissions, we need to acknowledge that plastics are critical to achieving both of those. It is clear that greenhouse gas emissions must be driven down through multiple sectors of the US economy: building and construction, vehicles, power generation, waste management, food production, consumer goods, and more. They can't do that without plastics. Plastics play an essential role in combating climate change because all economic sectors rely on the plastic supply chain to help them reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Plastics allow us to do more with less material, and that results in less greenhouse gas emissions than the alternative materials. If we want lower carbon electric cars, wind turbines, solar panels, and energy saving insulation, all things that reduce carbon emissions, we need plastics. The fourth item I want to stress is that while we agree we need a more circular economy that protects the climate, and there are provisions in the Break Free from Plastic Act that would do more harm to that than good, it would prevent advanced recycling technologies that can dramatically expand the types and amounts of plastics that can be recycled and reduce plastic waste. Under the Act, these facilities are subject to a pause. We need to accelerate, not pause, progress on these important recycling innovations. It would propose policies that restrict permits for plastic production for up to 3 years, stalling efforts to address plastic waste while simultaneously undermining the many positive benefits that plastics offer to society. And let's not forget that right now, our nation is administering millions of vaccines to our citizens, delivered in plastic syringes and packaged and protected in foam plastic packaging. The heroes injecting and the people receiving the vaccines are all wearing masks made with plastic fibers, and the pharmacists and clerks are all working behind plastic panels to help stop the spread. Last year, during the height of the pandemic, the people that make plastic production shifted production lines to make the materials we needed to fight the virus. Dow is one of the manufacturers of the raw materials behind personal protective equipment, hand sanitizers, disinfectants, IV bags, and food and medical supply packaging. We collaborated with partners to develop and donate medical gowns, face shields, and respirators. And like many US manufacturers, we saw it as our duty to help meet the overwhelming demand for these and many other supplies. In the midst of a climate crisis and a deadly pandemic, however, this legislation would put restrictions on the manufacture of the very materials that are driving real successes. A better approach for the environment and for consumers would be to focus on enabling a more circular economy, strengthening our nation's critical supply chains, and reinforcing our critical manufacturing capacity. My fifth and final point is this. In his executive orders to strengthen US resilience, President Biden noted the United States needs resilient, diverse, and secure supply chains to ensure our economic prosperity and national security. That's what the plastics industry is. That's who we are, and a key part of our nation's critical manufacturing capacity and workforce, the third largest manufacturing workforce in the country, and a critical part of the nation's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and positively affect climate change.
Thank you so much for that, Jim. Great remarks. I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ron Cotterman. Dr. Cotterman is the Vice President of Innovation and Sustainability at Sealed Air. Dr. Cotterman is going to make some remarks, and I'd like to turn it over to you now, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be part of this panel. You mentioned my title of Innovation and Sustainability in Sealed Air. Well, I think I've got one of the best jobs to be able to use innovation to meet sustainability needs. But let me first introduce you to Sealed Air. Who are we? We're a leading global packaging solutions company. And where did we come from? It's in our name. We started with our iconic bubble wrap 60 years ago, where we were sealing air inside of bubbles. But today, we manufacture both paper and plastic packaging solutions. And while bubble wrap is still part of that packaging family, the majority of our business is focused on specialty packaging, plastic packaging that keeps foods fresher and safer for longer. So I was really pleased to be asked to be part of this panel today to share with you why we are committed to plastics and advanced recycling. At Sealed Air, we recently invested $8 million in a company that converts plastic waste into new plastic packaging, both because it's the right thing to do and it makes good business sense. Following that, we also announced how we could use that specialty packaging, in our case, the kind that wraps and extends the shelf life of cheese, that can be collected and recycled back into new food grade packaging. This demonstration involved one of the UK's largest retailers, a major cheese manufacturer, an advanced recycling company, and a resin producer. So for us, plastic packaging is necessary, or I should even use the word essential, for getting those perishable food products from the point of where they're produced to the point where they're needed for consumption in groceries, restaurants, and even in your home. So for example, for fresh poultry, packaging that extends that shelf life can take a product that may only have a shelf life of 2 to 3 days to even 2 weeks or longer. This innovation through packaging has resulted in a reduction of food waste of over 65% in that case. And it further-wise, the reduction in food waste means a huge reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, one of the key points that Jim had just made. So it's a critical strategy for any company or country focused on a zero carbon future. In addition, the life cycle studies show that the alternatives to plastic packaging generally increase the packaging weight, but also produce significantly more greenhouse gas emissions. And on average, twice the greenhouse gas emissions of plastics throughout their production and use. So at Sealed Air, we are leaning into innovation to develop that packaging that not only can reduce overall environmental impact, but it can protect those foods and other goods and is made from materials that can be recycled in a circular loop. Because at Sealed Air, we've pledged by 2025 that 100% of our packaging will be recyclable and contain 50% recycled content. And we would not be able to attain this aggressive goal should this bill pass. For our food and medical packaging, we cannot make use of traditional mechanical recycled plastics to meet our pledge. We have concerns and there's issues around quality and safety. And so we rely on advanced recycling to meet those goals to ensure the protection of the essential products. Let me just conclude by saying that this bill, if passed, would halt the innovation that we see so critically needed for a circular economy for that plastic packaging and would limit free market investment. And that limitations on investment in advanced recycling in particular is bad for a private business like ours. As a leader in packaging, we are in the business to protect, to solve critical packaging challenges, and to make the world better than we found it. And as Jim said, we need to accelerate the innovation needed to meet those sustainability needs. So thank you very much.
Dr. Cotterman, thank you so much for those remarks. Why don't we turn it over to our next speaker, Bob Powell. Bob is the CEO of Brightmark and has a great story to tell us. So Bob, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thanks, Joshua. And I want to thank you very much for joining us today. As Joshua said, I'm the CEO here at Brightmark, and I will tell you that our team is excited about the opportunity to actually deal with an issue that we all know exists, which is we've got a plastic recycling shortfall, and there's a challenge associated with it. So our team, I believe, has the optimism and grit to tackle what it is we're facing. We don't think the best solution is to unfairly pick winners and losers in the marketplace by putting restrictions on production of highly efficient, durable, and versatile plastics. Plastics do amazing things for us. And as has already been mentioned, there are life-saving aspects of plastics, greenhouse gas reducing aspects of plastics as well. So what I would say would be, as a society, we've done this countless times where we've had a problem and we've leaned into and on technology and innovation with teams like the team we have here present, to preserve the societal benefits of plastic while also protecting the planet. We simply don't believe it is a mutually exclusive choice to think either plastics or the environment. We actually believe, and we're showing at Brightmark, that we can solve the problem and preserve the great benefits of plastics. So we've got a brilliant team creating solutions around this waste problem here at Brightmark, and we believe we can change the course and renew the world. So let me get specific with you. We've almost completed our $260 million advanced recycling facility in the town of Ashley, Indiana, Northeast Indiana. We've created many, many good paying manufacturing jobs. And as we finish shortly, the project there, now under construction for about 2 years, will employ 130 full-time people there, again, once we're fully operational. So when we're fully operational, that first phase in Ashley, Indiana, we're going to process at a scale unknown yet 100,000 tons of plastic waste per year and make valuable products, circular products, remaking plastics in addition to other products like waxes and fuels. So we think that we've got a solution that meets our economies and societal needs. So this isn't just a pilot project for us that we're sort of trying out. The technology invented 15 years ago works, as you can see, at an operational scale. And what we're doing is expanding our scale and scope. And we intend to continue building facilities like the ones in Ashley, Indiana. A little bit over a year ago, we had a national RFP for communities who asked for us to build additional facilities like the one in Ashley throughout the United States. So we have 3 additional areas in addition to expanding in Indiana that we're focused in on: the Northeast, the Southeast, and then the Gulf Coast region, where we intend to build facilities that will process 400,000 tons of material a year, plastics post-use, into usable products. Each one of those projects in those 3 locations represent an investment of approximately $500 million and greater on a per site basis and employ many jobs. And in the process, what we believe we can do at scale is solve this issue globally by reusing, by creating a circular economy out of the post-use plastics. So we're extremely optimistic. But what we believe is if you limit our and others' ability to utilize advanced recycling technologies with this legislation, you're going to hinder our progress, put a pause on solving what we believe to be one of the Earth's most impactful issues. We can do it at Brightmark, and we as a team here can absolutely do it. So I want to thank you for listening, and I'm very optimistic about the future here.
Bob, thank you for those remarks. Thank you for being a leader, and thank you for being an innovator. Why don't we turn it over next to Bill Cooper. Bill is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Agilex. Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Great, thank you, Joshua. As Joshua mentioned, my name is Bill Cooper. I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Agilex Corporation. I live in San Francisco, and I grew up in Berkeley in off-grid cabins. I spent my life in the outdoors, hiking and fishing, and I love the environment. But I have a huge appreciation for the benefits that plastics bring to modern society, and a great understanding of the need for solutions to deal with post-use plastic and plastic pollution. And this is where Agilex comes in. Agilex is 16 years old. We currently have over 70 employees, all with a focus on finding ways to recycle hard to recycle plastics. Not the water bottle or the milk jug, but the films, the single-use plastics, the food service items, the packaging, keeping that material out of the landfill, keeping it away from incineration, and most importantly, keeping it out of the environment in the oceans. Agilex has a technology that utilizes pyrolysis. It's heating plastic in the absence of oxygen. And that's a critical point. There is no oxygen, there is no combustion, and there's no incineration. We utilize that heat to break down plastic to its core building blocks. And we can reuse those building blocks to create virgin equivalent plastics or intermediate products to create new plastics that all can go back to food contact or to pharma or whatever the original use of those products was. In doing this, we have a 40 to 70% lower carbon footprint than the original manufacturing of those materials. So this recycling helps with the greenhouse gas profile of plastics. In doing this, we enable our partners to take polystyrene back to polystyrene, acrylic back to acrylic, mixed waste plastics back to polyethylene and polypropylene. And we are doing this commercially now. In our history, we've recycled over 11 million pounds of plastic. Our current facility in Tigard, Oregon, over 2.8 million pounds of polystyrene. To give you an idea how much that is, it's 30 miles of tractor trailers end to end filled with polystyrene foam. We have a number of facilities in development in the US, in Europe, and in Asia, and are driving growth and innovation related to recycling. As it relates to the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, the Act suggests a temporary pause of up to 3 years in permitting advanced recycling facilities. These are the facilities that we're trying to build, Agilex, Brightmark. That will eliminate the US growth in this industry at a critical time. It will shift innovation to Europe and to Asia. It will shift jobs to Europe and to Asia. And it will cripple an industry that is focused on exactly what it should be focused on: circular economies, circular pathways for plastics, green jobs, low carbon solutions, and reducing plastic pollution, keeping it out of the environment and the oceans. Advanced recycling is a great tool, and this tool, working with mechanical recycling, has the ability to increase recycling rates from the current 10% worldwide up to as high as 90%. So let's accelerate the growth of this new industry, not stop it. Thank you.
Bill, excellent remarks. Also, thank you so much for your leadership and for all the work you're doing. I want to change course a little bit here and introduce our next speaker, Dr. Marco Castaldi. Dr. Castaldi is a professor of chemical engineering at the City College of New York and is going to provide us a unique perspective on advanced recycling, sustainability, and circularity from his point of view. So Dr. Castaldi, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you for the opportunity for me to give my perspective on a lot of the work that we've been doing over the years. You've heard plastics are excellent material that has improved the environment overall. They're used in cars to improve gas mileage, packaging, to protect and preserve food, resulting basically in less waste. And they're also used in the medical field. I've done research in the area of sustainable waste management, primarily focusing on thermal conversion processes for nearly 20 years. Movements that ban technologies or materials never work because consumers worldwide rely on the materials and they're embedded into the economy. Instead of running away from plastics by trying to ban them, it's better to manage them properly using the best technologies that are available. There is not a single solution that will address the issue of plastic waste or any waste for that matter. All possible processes and techniques and technologies must be used to ensure that waste stays out of the environment. Banning production here will not stop products from being made. The US has some of the best waste management policies. They embrace the sustainable waste management hierarchy that encourages reduction, reuse, recycling, and energy recovery. But mechanical recycling of plastics has practical limits. Therefore, development of thermal or advanced recycling processes will complement those mechanical recycling efforts, and it'll result in reduced energy usage, reduced virgin material extraction, and less waste going to landfills or persisting in the environment. As an engineer and researcher and educator, I've come to realize that we need solid science to guide policy decisions. The best way to improve our environment is with practical technologies and processes. Decisions that arbitrarily forbid the use of certain technologies force us into a situation where we don't have all the solutions available to us and prevents future engineers and scientists from improving systems that are designed to manage our waste. There's only so much one can learn from textbooks. We must work with the hardware to develop experiential learning that can only come with operations. I require that me and my team, students and young career engineers, go on site physically to see, touch, and experience the operation of all the technologies we work with when we conduct due diligences and other analyses. Policies that try to ban materials or forbid technologies have the opposite effect because it sends a message to the public that the material will no longer be produced or used, and therefore they don't need to worry about it or what to do with it because it'll soon be gone. That won't happen. And it does nothing for the current situation where tons of plastic should be captured and recycled, both mechanically and thermally recycled into new products. We need to find practical solutions to the problem today and future problems, and instead of trying to make them disappear. I think this bill that is trying to be enacted will only hinder not only progress, but the education of the next generation of engineers and scientists. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Castaldi. I think you make a good point there. Bans never work, innovation does. So thank you so much for your remarks. With that, I want to turn it over to our final speaker, Chris John. Chris is the president and CEO of the American Chemistry Council. Chris, the floor is yours to close this out.
Thank you, Joshua. Appreciate it. So we're at the point of the agenda now where everything's been said, but not everybody said it. So I'm going to try to put a fine point on a couple of key issues here. So look, people have legitimate questions about how plastics contribute to the problem of waste. But what gets our members out of bed in the morning is facing those types of challenges head on, confident in the knowledge that we're involved in manufacturing materials that can help us do more with less, that contribute to a more efficient use of resources, and that help address climate change and lead the way to a better planet and a safer world. And you've heard that here today from our previous speakers. Our efforts are focused on a few key areas: redesigning packaging, modernizing recycling, using advanced technologies to capture and reuse plastic, and closing the loop to keep plastics where they belong, out of the environment and used as resources to make new materials. Now, America's plastics makers have set a goal for 100% of plastic packaging used in the United States to be recyclable or recoverable by 2030, and to be reused, recycled, or recovered by 2040. In just the past 3 years, over 60 projects worth over $5.5 billion in modern recycling technologies have been announced in the United States alone. These are game-changing technologies that have the potential to recover more than 9 billion pounds of waste, mostly plastics, and keep them out of landfills. Many of these technologies will significantly expand the types and quantities of plastics that can be recovered and reused in new manufacturing. Let me give you a couple of examples. So Shell, for example, has committed to using 1 million metric tons of post-use plastics per year as feedstock at their chemical plants by 2025. CP Chem is running a commercial scale facility in Texas that makes circular polyethylene from mixed plastic waste. LyondellBasell has announced a goal to produce 2 million metric tons of recycled and renewable-based polymers by 2030. So as I conclude my remarks, let me be clear. America's plastics makers are already leading the way and acting as a catalyst, investing and innovating to create solutions. Congressional leadership should announce that the Break-Free bill as dead on arrival as introduced. During one of our gravest crises that our nation has ever faced, this bill would threaten lives by interrupting the manufacture of critical life-saving materials, suffocate economic growth, and threaten our environment and any hope of making significant progress in the fight against climate change. So we stand ready to work with Congress on bipartisan solutions to end waste, but they must be pragmatic. And we're ready to roll up our sleeves and get after it. So thank you for your time and attention today. And I'm going to turn it back to Joshua to facilitate the Q&A portion of the program.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for the remarks. Thank you for everyone's remarks. I think in my opening part, I said, this is a solvable problem that can be done through collaboration, partnerships, and innovation. And I think the panel today gave a good demonstrative view of what that means. I think I'm going to pause really quickly and open it up to Jennifer, who's going to make a couple of logistical comments regarding the Q&A portion of the event.
Thank you, Joshua. We'll now open up the program for Q&A. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat along with your name and affiliation. If called on, you'll be unmuted to ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. It seems like we already got our first question here. Steve Tolkien from Plastics News. Steve, it seems like you have a question about advanced recycling and policy. So why don't we unmute you? And Steve, thank you again for joining, and thank you for always listening to our point of view. Steve, can you hear us? How about now?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Here we go, Steve. Thank you so much.
Here we go, the Verizon commercial, the old ones. With the emphasis here, thanks for taking my question. With the emphasis you're putting on advanced recycling, right now there's a lot of projects in pilot scale, but how quickly can those technologies scale up to make a real dent in plastic recycling? I mean, right now our recycling rate's about 14% for containers and packaging. And then I guess you raise a lot of concerns about the Break Free Act, but what detailed legislation is ACC supporting at this point? I mean, you have your general roadmap, but what detailed legislation are you guys supporting at this point? So thank you.
Steve, thank you for that question. I'm going to actually go in reverse order here and start off with what we're for, and then I'd like to turn it over to talk a little bit about the advanced recycling. I wanted to be very clear about what we're for. We're for creating a sustainable future. We're for fighting climate change, and we're for reducing plastic waste. Steve outlined and mentioned our forward-looking roadmap to circularity. That is our strategic framework to guide what we're doing. There are 4 key components here that we are working to address, both through partnerships and collaboration, but also working with our own members to put forth our own proposals and our own solutions. And they center around 4 key ideas. First off is a shared responsibility model that, as I mentioned, levies fees on packaging, utilizes those resources, ensures they stay in the system to invest that money into recycling infrastructure and consumer education. We're for the acceleration and the acceptance of advanced recycling because it is the most effective tool that we have at our disposal to recover more plastic waste. And it's also allows us to revolutionize how we use and reuse our plastic materials. We are for recycled content and circular content, but that needs to be based upon science and engineering. And we're for it because we want to ensure more of our plastic is reused to make new products. And we are for a national recycling strategy that supports the standardization of recycling and improves access to consumers all across the US. These are just a few of the components that we are. In regards to that first one, America's Plastic Makers, we have endorsed the Recycling Partnership Circular Economy Accelerator proposal. This is supported by a range of stakeholders, brands, material manufacturers, and NGOs. It is one proposal in our broader suite of solutions that we're doing, that we're working on. And we're also working to enact this through coalitions and partnerships. I'm going to pause here, and I want to take the other question. And I know Jim and Chris, I'd love for you guys to chime in here because you guys have both been great champions of some of that shared responsibility work. And maybe we could pause, and Bill and Ron, as I just mentioned, I view advanced recycling as the centerpiece of our strategy to recovering more plastic waste. This idea that it's not real or not moving fast enough, I don't think is a true statement as you guys have outlined today. So maybe you two could tell us a little bit more. Bob, maybe chime in here a little bit as well. Tell us why this is real. Tell us why this is part of the solution, and tell us a little bit more about your growth and strategies.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you, Joshua. As I think about all emerging industries, there is an evolution in efficiency and an evolution in scale. Look at the electric car industry. Tesla today was not Tesla of 10 years ago. If you look at the solar industry, the efficiencies in solar panels and the proliferation of solar generation, it wasn't what it was 10 years ago. So look at chemical recycling or advanced recycling. As you think about that, think about the discrepancy in scale between waste plastics and the plastic production. Actually finding this plastic and aggregating it is a challenge. That's a challenge that we're all focused on. We are building out infrastructure. Over the next 10 years, you will notice a significant increase in recycling rates here in the United States, enabled by advanced recycling, enabled by the ability to take materials that mechanical recycling can't. We'll continue to support mechanical recycling. We don't want their material. We want to recycle the other stuff. So you will see that, but it's not just a question of what advanced recycling can do. It is a question of education, teaching consumers what's possible in terms of plastic recycling. It's a question of creating new value chains, working with the resin producers, the converters, the retail, consumer, having them understand what's possible and cooperating together to combat plastic pollution. So you will see a change. It is real. We are doing it now, and that scale will grow.
So if I could just add to that with kind of additional comments about the example I presented. Is it real? It is real every day. You go into the supermarket that we've partnered with in the UK to buy the cheese that is wrapped in the packaging that's made in our facilities that uses recycled content that came from plastics that came back from consumers. It is absolutely real. Is it large enough scale? Absolutely not. And that's what we need. We need to invest in the innovation to build out the scale so we can do what we are doing right now in the UK. We want to be able to do that in the US. We need our US industry to grow and to create additional capacity to take those recycled plastics and convert them into new materials so that as a packaging converter, we can put those back and create that circular loop. So yes, we've demonstrated that it's real. It's important for business, and the products that we produce are important for society. So yes, we would like to see this scale in the US, much as we're seeing it now outside the US.
Thank you, Ron. And maybe I'd like to maybe bring in Jim here. Jim, Dow has been a champion on thinking about how our public policy and the strategies around that. Maybe you could share just a few comments on the shared responsibility model and why Dow supports that.
I think one of the biggest things that's changed here is the demand signal from the whole value chain for the use of recycled materials. That's been an overnight change. We have products in our line today that have up to 70% post-consumer recycled material in them, and they've tripled in sales. So the demand is going to be there for the products. Now what we've got to make sure is that the supply of the raw material can be there. We don't have enough access to recycling across this country today. By the way, that's not just true for plastics. That's true for a lot of other materials. There's many things that people put in a recycle bin that don't get recycled today. But getting access to that raw material could open up an $80 to $120 billion raw material pipeline that could be converted. By the way, that material is less expensive and takes less energy, as Bill talked about, to convert into plastics, either the same product or upcycled into something different than virgin materials. So you're helping yourself on multiple levels here. You're creating a circular economy which doesn't exist today. That's another level of the economy versus regulating an industry out, which is driving the economy down. And I think that's the part that a lot of people miss. You have to design for circularity. Your systems and your policies have to reinforce recycling. And then you have to let industry innovate and let the capital markets work. Don't tell us you want recycling and you want lower greenhouse gas emissions and then tell us all the things we can't do to deliver that goal for you. If you want more recycled material and you want lower greenhouse gas emissions, put smart policies in place that drive those two things and let this US capital system work. And I'm telling you, it will take off.
Amen, Jim. Thank you for that.
Josh, may I add on the
Yeah,
viability?
please go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. So there are a couple of really good questions here that I believe Steve raised, right? Which is NGO's question, the viability of advanced or chemical recycling, and then very specifically around timing. So viability, just real quick, I've spent over 30 years in both the waste and energy industry, over 15 exclusively in the clean energy and solving waste problem space. The first company I ran, we actually started in the early days of solar when there were questions about solar and wind. We know what the deployment looks like and the result is for renewable energy solutions. I see exactly the same thing here, right? So the price of solar energy was 15 to 20 times what it is currently now. So at Brightmark, we, and Bill also, we believe at Agilex as well, offer advanced recycling via pyrolysis with the environmental benefits that Bill spoke about before. This facility that we are finishing in Ashley, Indiana, to be clear, within just a couple of months, will process 100,000 tons of plastics a year and provide the feedstocks necessary for Jim and others to actually make polypropylene, polyethylene, fully circular products, other products as well. So from an economic standpoint, knowing history around the capital markets, what is economically viable to create sustainable companies, our technology works. It even worked economically with last year's COVID depression of commodity prices. So it's economic. So can we scale it? What I tell you with the expansion of Ashley and then the 3 other regions I mentioned earlier, in 2.5 to 3 years, we could have online facilities that will take in 1.6 million tons of post-use plastics every single year just in the eastern half of the United States. So it's viable, it's economic, and from a scale perspective, we can be very specific about what we're prepared to do at Brightmark. That's a lot of plastics that allows us to create that circular economy.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to pause here because we have some questions in the queue and I want to make sure we get to a few others. Why don't we open it up to Catherine from Politico. Catherine Bordeaux, good to see you and good to hear from you. Maybe we can unmute you so you could ask your question. Catherine, are you there? Maybe the host can unmute her. There we go.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, Catherine.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking my question. So you mentioned that the Chemistry Council supports fees on packaging, and just curious if you support the version of that included in Break Free from Plastics, or if you have a different policy in mind.
Thank you so much for that question, Catherine. And again, thank you so much for joining. We are for policies that don't pick winners and losers. And right now, under the Break Free proposal, it picks winners and losers, and it incentivizes materials that significantly produce more greenhouse gas emissions. As I mentioned, we are for a shared responsibility model, one that levies fees on all packaging, regardless of the type of material, and utilizes those resources to invest in more recycling infrastructure and consumer education. That is a forward-looking vision and strategy that we've outlined in our roadmap to circularity, and it's something that we have been guided by our guiding principles that we released last year. So thank you so much for that question. I see we have another question here from Alex, another one about advanced recycling. Or I guess Alexander, excuse me. I would hate when people call me by not my full name. Alexander, thank you so much for joining. Can you tell us what outlet you're with and your question?
Okay, Alex Tulo from Chemical and Engineering News magazine. I was wondering if, because I heard a lot about in the talk so far about the impact on advanced recycling, presumably chemical recycling. I was wondering if you could walk me through a bit the provisions of the bill that would limit that. Is it part of the bill on the moratorium on new chemical plants and expansions, or is it by virtue of excluding chemical recycling and pyrolysis and so on from the definitions of recycling, or is it all of the above? I was kind of wondering about the sort of mechanics of the bill and how that might affect the advanced recycling.
Alex, thank you so much for that question. It's a very important question, and one that I want to make sure we're very clear on. The legislation calls for a pause of advanced recycling facilities in the proposal. We have not seen the final bill language that will be introduced, but we know that it's been part of the versions that have been produced in the past. I want to channel what Jim said, though. We're not for pausing advanced recycling. We're for accelerating and growing the acceptance of advanced recycling. One key thing in this bill is it calls for high rates of the use of recycled content. You can't meet those commitments put forth in the bill without advanced recycling. So if you're going to pause advanced recycling, you can't accomplish other portions of the bill. But here's what's important. Hundreds of brands have made commitments to use more recycled content in their products. We are committed to working with those brands and ensuring that they meet their commitment, so more of the products that consumers put their hands on have more recycled content. So thank you so much for that question. I'd love to open it up, Chris or Jim, get in here and kind of give us some thoughts on that one.
Sure, Joshua. So I'll just amplify what you said, which is one quick point. So we focused obviously on break free here today, particularly at the federal level. But I would point out that we have seen 10 different states, kind of both blue states and red states, pass legislation that would enable and break down the regulatory barriers to advanced recycling. So in fact, the states are going the other way and that they're enabling this technology. So it would be terrible at the federal level then to walk that back. And the investment that we're hearing about today, that literally is game-changing technology that will eventually take billions of pounds of plastics out of landfills and into new products.
And I would just add to Chris's point, Joshua, that we have to remember that waste management is a very local issue. To have a national recycling strategy that sets some targets for how much material you wanted to see recycled, and then to enable the states and the municipalities to drive to those levels, I think would be a good 1-2 punch to be able to deliver what we need to close this loop and create the circular economy. So I think we have to think about the federal role and the state and local role here in making this become a reality.
Joshua, you're on mute.
Isn't that the story of our life in virtual environment? You're on mute. Somebody trademarked that line. We're going to take one final question and kind of wrap this up. We got the Wall Street Journal on. I'm going to probably mispronounce your name, and I'm going to apologize in advance. Sabria, is that, did I get that right? I know you had your hand up, and I want to make sure we get you unmuted to ask your question here. Is she still on? There we go.
We had there's a technical issue there. So she's
Can you hear me now?
about 2 seconds to be able to speak her question. She wasn't allowed to otherwise speak it.
I just heard her speak. Can you try it again?
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you for taking my question. It's pronounced Sabra. I just wanted to check in on 2 things. So one is you talked a lot about plastic and the circular loop and stuff going back into new plastic. I just wanted to check as to whether there was in fact a commitment to plastic being turned into new plastic versus, I know the concern a lot of the time is it being just turned into like pyrolysis, for instance, being used to turn plastic into fuel. And then the second bit is the conversation's almost entirely been about chemical recycling, but obviously there are other provisions to the bill apart from EPR and chemical recycling. And have you kind of taken a more granular stance on some of the other bits that have been proposed? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for joining. Sorry for the technical difficulties in the mute. Let me start off really fast, and we could open it up on the advanced recycling component. We are for the acceleration of advanced recycling because it allows us to take post-use plastic and remanufacture it into a variety of products. What does that mean? That's an excellent output for our environment because we're using less virgin and natural resources to create new products. That is a winner that both combats climate change and reduces plastic waste. In regards to the other components of the bill, I think I pointed out to you some of the proposals are contradictory. If our goal is to end plastic waste or address the issue of plastic waste, this legislation doesn't do it. This legislation does the exact opposite. And I think that's why we are so committed to the roadmap of circularity that we've outlined, our strategic framework that will guide us to deal with this issue, have a more sustainable future, end plastic waste, and address climate change at the same time is something that all of us on this call are committed to. I'd love to open it up as we kind of take this last question, and not all all of these proposals have a variety of components to them. We've not seen the final piece of legislation, but from what we know today, this is something that would not do what it's intended to do. Happy to, Chris or anybody.
I would just add to your question, Sabra, and just say to you, I've never seen such a strong demand signal from the consumer brand companies and from the products companies and from the converters in the value chain for recycled material. In previous versions, if you went back a decade and people would be against advanced recycling, what's different now from then is we didn't have the same kind of demand signal for these recycled materials that we do today. I don't think Ron would have had it at Sealed Air. Many others wouldn't have had it. And I think that tells you that there's a value in it, and there's also a value in upcycling to higher quality materials, more durable materials as well. So I think you've got a real market change that's happened here, and that's another reason to not let this act pass.
Dr.
Yeah.
Castaldi, maybe you could get in here. You haven't had a chance to weigh in. Tell us a little bit of that point of view as we wrap up here.
So, yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I did want to comment on the idea of this, thermal processing, pyrolysis, and so on. Only a certain amount could be mechanically recycled. You've got very complex layers. The team here knows this much better than I do. Potato chip bags, for example. But in those complex layers, there are things in materials such as, say, some metals. When you thermally break those down, you actually liberate the metals that then could be further recovered. And so there's generally, at least what I see, maybe a fear or a misunderstanding of thermal processes that they're just bad. This is incorrect. They have their place, and in many cases, they serve to break things down in a controlled way that actually enable other types of recovery. We've seen it ourselves where we've recovered those metals that are in those multi-layer bags and so on. Then now you've got the plastics going where they need to go, or the plastic monomers going where they need to go, and you've got the metals going where they need to go to continually recycle. So thermal processes should not just be always categorized into one type of area. That's really the best thing that I could add on top of that.
Thank you, Marco. I know we're coming to the end of time. I'm going to just, if any of our panelists want to make any one final remark based upon that question or any of the final questions, I'll give you a quick 30 seconds and we can wrap this up for anybody who wants to chime in.
Joshua, I think I can make a quick one on the question. I think one of the questions, and then I'll give you my optimistic viewpoint here, was around fuels. Jim said it right. So when we started construction 2 years ago and started our major investments in our facility in Indiana, going back 3 years ago, the market was actually not where circular products were as much in demand. Had we been starting now, we would produce no transportation fuels at all, because what we've seen is the market has moved very clearly toward demanding circular solutions. And so it's economic, viable, as we've discussed with our technology, believe Agilix as well, so it can be done. And that's really my closing is if we allow innovation to occur like this team is working on, it will put us in a much better place. So I'm optimistic that we will create totally circular, and we have, and a marketplace, totally circular solutions that both keep the great use of plastics and allow us to deal with them after they've been used and recirculate them.
So would also like to add to that as it relates to pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is a tool that can be used for a number of different things. Out in Tigard, Oregon, we're recycling polystyrene. It is an ISCC Plus certified pathway, a circular pathway, taking plastic back to plastic. So those pathways exist, and you have a lot of options to deal with all types of plastics with thermal conversion, and in our case, pyrolysis. So it's not limited to fuels. It's plastic to plastic, very definitely as well.
Thank you, Bill.
I'd like to just make one final comment. Collaboration, innovation, and education. You heard me talk a lot about innovation. You heard Dr. Castaldi talk a lot about the need to educate on what this technology is. But the collaboration is a key part of it too. Companies working together. Jim mentioned the demand signals. We could never have pulled that circular demonstration together with advanced recycling if there wasn't a strong push for collaboration. It's there in the marketplace now. The market is ready for it, and we need to make the investments and accelerate progress. So collaboration, innovation, education, the magic formula.
Thank you, Ron. Jim or Chris, anything you want to add before we close it out?
I would say the history of the growth of plastics has been all about sustainability. It's about the ability to make things lighter, cleaner, faster, stronger. And now if you add a lower CO2 footprint and circularity on top of it, the whole value chain is engaged in trying to do that. Don't take tools out of our hands. Help us with policies that can accelerate us and move us forward.
Let me just build on that in 10 seconds. Is we all share the same goals. We're all trying to go in the same direction. So let's join hands, work together, and make it happen.
Thank you so much, Chris. I want to emphasize and close with this. We are ready to work with anybody, any brand, any policymaker, any stakeholder who shares our vision of creating a more sustainable future, fighting climate change, and ending plastic waste. The panel of folks you see here today are all-star leaders of innovators, leaders in sustainability, and leaders in circularity who are thinking far onto the horizon of how we can solve some of these great problems. I know that what I heard from everybody today is a tone of optimism and a tone of seriousness to get down to work and solve some big problems. So on behalf of our member companies, on behalf of our partners, thank you so much for joining with us. If you have any follow-up questions, our press contact is Jennifer Killinger. You have probably received the media advisory from her. If you have any follow-up questions, please direct them to her. And with that, we'll conclude today. Panel, thank you so much for joining. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good day.